One takeaway from this could be that family with hereditary colorectal cancer, then it would be recommended to adopt yourself away from that family as soon as possible at a young age. That would decrease the risk, correct?
I would say yes, really. That would be what you want to do to reduce your risk of colorectal cancer if you see that there's a case in the family. But of course, that's inhumane and doesn't make sense.
Yeah. Welcome to space, Rahma Elmahdi, if I'm pronouncing it correctly.
Yes, very well pronounced, and thank you for having me. Thanks.
Yeah. I think we'll cover a lot of topics today, but you came to my attention when I saw an article in a Norwegian science publication, a website called forskning.no, regarding bowel disease. But first of all, I want to introduce you, and I hope I'm correct here. I see that you're a postdoctoral research fellow in epidemiology research and a medical doctor with a PhD in public health. Did I forget something there, or am I right?
Yes, that's absolutely correct. So I am a medical doctor, and I work most of the time in training actually in infectious disease medicine, and I work in infection and lung medicine day to day most of the time. Today, I am enjoying one of my few research days, which bring me to my research group, where I've done some of the work that you've been reading about, looking at the impact of essentially infections I'm interested in on our immune response, and then subsequent inflammatory and immune diseases that develop as a result of those infections, or maybe as a result of the lack of them.
Yeah.
Which is also another very interesting.
Yeah, that's very interesting. Can you tell me just shortly about your background? Because I can tell by your accent, you don't have this Danish accent. Where do you live currently, and why did you come to Denmark, if that's where you are?
Yes. No, this is definitely not the classical Danish accent. I'm told I have quite a strong English accent. So I'm from and I grew up in London. I grew up in a immigrant family from Sudan. So hence my very Arabic sounding name. And I always had a real passion and interest for science and people, which is what took me to medical school. And I was at medical school in London in the UK, and also did my PhD there. And after a couple of years working as a doctor in the UK, decided to move to Denmark to really fulfill my research ambitions, getting into the wonderful epidemiological data sources that exist, of course, here in Scandinavia, which I don't know if you know how lucky you are to have this huge wealth of data on your populations that really allow us to do the kind of interesting analysis and results that I've been able to do the last couple of years. It's not so easily done in other systems. So that's what I'm doing here in Denmark. Currently working with specifically an inflammatory bowel disease research group.
Exactly, yeah. When I did my light kind of research on you, it kind of shed some light about your personal journey, and you seem to be interested in this big history topic. You read Bill Bryson, which was an inspiration I saw. Is this what brought you into science, or is it a bigger thing? Is big history a big thing in your interest?
Yeah, definitely. I would say so. I think that in my mind, science is a tool. It's a vehicle, one of several that we can use to better understand our world and better sort of understand our place in it, and help us guide ourselves in our actions and activities for human, if we want to call it, development, but rather I like to think of it as sort of well-being and maintenance. So Bill Bryson's short history of nearly everything completely changed my direction. Before that, I was quite adamant I wanted to go into politics. I thought that was probably a very good way of helping people, which is always what I sort of wanted to do when I was younger. And I saw that science was actually a very effective tool in that toolbox that we have for enlightening humans and making people better. So that's why I eventually decided, after reading that I'd go to university to study medicine. It just seemed sort of a match made in heaven. Enjoying sciences as I did, relatively good at them, and also really, really knowing that the important thing that I wanted to do is keeping it in context and what really science meant for people.
Yeah. Changing the world is not a small task, but if you have the science tools in your hands, I think you're in a better chance. I perfectly agree. It's the way to understand nature and what her or him or what we call in nature are telling us. That's very inspiring. And to specifically to your research, what caught my attention is that you found that in this type of you can tell a little bit about it first, but in your research you found that the environmental factor was a bigger predictor of this kind of bowel cancer than genetics, and the reason why I find it interesting, because in the latter years I've heard there has been the Human Genome Project is one thing, but also that we can learn more than we thought we could by genes and heredity on good and bad. It's not everybody that likes that, but can you tell me a little bit about your study and how you came to find this finding?
Yeah, absolutely. So this study was something of an inheritance, actually. Should be quite honest. So I wasn't initially involved in the devising of this study. I took it upon myself because it had been through quite a few hands. And the reason why it was finally sort of landed on my desk as the postdoc in the group. Postdocs are notoriously known for clearing up those loose ends that their professors don't have time for. But the reason why it landed on my desk is because we were coming to the end of our data agreements, because the data being used for this study came from 3 countries. So it was a collaboration between Norway, Finland and Denmark, and we were using pretty comprehensive data, which was the National Civil Registries, which in combination includes over specifically people with colorectal cancer, over 2 million people.
Right.
So it was extensive data that we had, and of course very, very tight regulations around that are time limited. But the study itself was conceived quite a while before I was involved, actually 10 years ago. And the question we wanted to answer, as you've already alluded to in your introduction, is what exactly is the genetic impact on something like colorectal cancer? Now, colorectal cancer has been increasing in incidence across most of the world, but particularly in Northern Europe over the last decades, really. And it's also been increasing in incidence in younger age groups.
Okay.
So when we think about a genetic contribution for something like that, it's not really very classic that you'd get an increase in incidence of a disease if it's just all down to genetics. And of course, we know that with colorectal cancer, like many other diseases, it's not all down to genetics. You know, we know that well. But the question of how much of that increased risk within a family is due to your relationship to that family member, that you're their son or their father, mother, or is it because you're sharing so much together, everything from your diet, from your activity levels, your predisposition to obesity in that context, and also the other environmental things that we might be sharing, like water supplies, and other factors that are all really confusing this picture of how much of that increased risk, because there clearly is within families, is due to the fact that I'm inheriting it in a genetic manner, or even in an epigenetic manner.
So just a quick question, because you might, I think you answered it, but the increase in cancer, in this type of cancer, I would guess some contribution comes from just the population of especially the Western world, but also the global population is getting older, and everybody over 70 years have a higher risk. But you also said that this is also in younger generations, and you're talking about percentages, right? Not absolutes. It's not because of we're getting older. It's more than that.
Yeah, absolutely. And we see quite clearly that the effect is lost as you age. So, as you've said, the older we get, the higher our risk for developing a whole host of cancers, including colorectal cancer, is. And we see that, and that's observed. And actually, even in a familial context, when you have a relative who is genetically related to you who's at risk of colorectal cancer, that increased risk that you have disappears after the age of 65 compared to the general population. And we can see that from our data here that we've looked at as well. So, aging is not the issue that's causing this increased incidence that we're saying. And as you've pointed out, it is a rate. So there is a controlled denominator, if you like, when it comes to the population. So it's a truly observed increase. And because the data we have is so very reliable, it's nationwide, there is very few, if any, people being diagnosed with colorectal cancer in Norway or Sweden who are being missed from these registers, right? So this good quality data that we can say that there's an actual observe in the increase of diagnosis. And our diagnostics for colorectal cancer haven't really improved, sadly, actually, over the decades to an extent where we can say, we're just picking it up earlier, and so that's coupled with the fact that it's a younger age group who are developing cancer as well.
This is
should be something that concerns us.
Yeah, absolutely. This is very interesting. And the last point you said that the diagnosis didn't either had an impact, a big impact, because a lot of science, at least in the popular media, is not showing the absolute or the relatively risks and everything. So this is very interesting. So back to the environmental part. How did you manage to figure this out and adjust for genes and still see that this is environmental?
Yeah, so it was a little bit of a, almost, I would say, quick and dirty, if it wasn't for the fact that this work took 10 years, and some of the best statisticians we have actually here in Denmark, who are based at State and Serum Institute, which is our National Department of Health's research arm. So it was, as I've said, using just their health registries. So this is the cancer diagnosis registries and the civil registries. So we were able to find the diagnoses of colorectal cancer pretty much since the start of the development of these registries, which, depending on the country, goes back to as far back in Finland as 1953.
Wow.
To today, which is really, we're talking a long-term follow-up.
Yeah, and it's us as well. It's baby boomers and until now, so it's very representative, I would say. Yeah.
Yes, exactly. So it's very extensive, which allows us really to capture that change over time very nicely as well. And so with those cases, we're then able to, using the civil registries, of course, link them to relations, first-degree relations being counted as people who are father, mother, son, daughter, etc. So that first degree of relation, also second degree relations being considered as aunts, uncles, cousins, grandparents, etc. So created a cohort around the index case and followed that cohort essentially over time to see what their risk of cancer was. Now, what we then did to try and account for the genetic aspect, if you like, was took the environmental factor to be, if you shared a household with these people, what was the difference to you not sharing a household with someone but still having that genetic linkage with them? Was that number, essentially, that statistic, was what we saw as the difference, that was the environmental factor that was included. And so when we ran this, or when we followed up these patients over the time period, we found that there was a higher incidence of cancer in those patients who shared that genetic relationship in the first degree and the second degree who were also sharing a household environment, and particularly seen for those who were sharing a household environment during the period when they were children.
Mhm.
And as I said earlier, that was really lost once people were over 65 years of age, because, we're all at risk then, really.
Yeah, exactly.
That age-related cancer.
So, because I have the follow-up question there would be that just by guessing, I would guess that the first degree and second degree relations are more likely to be living together because they are siblings and mother and daughters, mother and sons, etc. How do you control for that? Do you have this amazing gold standard twin studies that you can follow the twins that are not living at home?
Yeah, so that is controlled for by being able to observe the civil registries. So we know where people are living because of that. We know where people are not living together, and that was the difference we were trying to measure. So what was happening in those parents who were not living with their children,
from young
compared
age,
to those parents who were living with their children, exactly, who had a commonly shared index case, so that is a family member with colorectal cancer.
So who are these children that were not living with their parents? Were they kind of adopted, and maybe it's not twins, but they're adopted and not okay? So
yeah, exactly. So because it's a registry study, we're working on a population level. So as we've said, over 2 million people. So we can't say exactly what happened to each of these cases where we're seeing there's a separation of living arrangements. We don't know what's happening actually in those households, and certainly there's a whole host of factors that I'm sure might be at play there. But what we can say with confidence is that separation is not a genetic.
Exactly.
Or the impact of that separation on the fact that they're living apart on risk of colorectal cancer is not down to the genetics alone. So we don't know why people are living in different households, but we know that when people are living in different households, their risk for colorectal cancer, when they are related to a family member, is actually altered. It's reduced.
So one takeaway from this could be that if you are living with, if there's a family with both hereditary colorectal cancer, and then it would be recommended to adopt yourself away from that family as soon as possible at young age. That would decrease the risk, or decrease the environmental risk, correct?
Purely as an answer,
for
purely
that type
looking
of cancer.
at that, I would say yes, really. That would be what you want to do to reduce your risk of colorectal cancer if you see that there's a case in the family. But of course, that's inhumane and doesn't make sense.
Yeah,
I'm not going to turn around to my mum and say, "Oh, well, you've got colorectal cancer now. That means at the age of 8 years old, I've got to move out."
Yeah, it's a cost risk analysis as well. You have to. There's other things coming that's not that well. But again, I find this very interesting because in bowel disease or bowel health in general, there has been a lot of talk about that we have a lot of bacteria, and as far as I know, we have more bacteria than we have human cells. So and if you're living with people, you are sharing environmental in the sense of the genetics of the bacterial. So it's spread around. You're touching handles, going to the same toilet. Sorry, my French, but I very often have the same smell of farts that my son has. I don't know if this is related, but could this be a way of explaining this? Could this be the next step in the science to the research to figure out if this is the kind of the transplant part of the science?
Yeah, so the mechanism is, again, a very good question. And what you've described, so a shared microbiota, essentially, which is that gut microorganism that you're talking about, has certainly been implicated in a lot of very compelling evidence with risk of not just things like inflammatory bowel disease, but also inflammatory diseases like cancer. Cancer is an inflammatory disease as well in itself, we have to keep in mind. So yes, the answer to your question is that would be a good first next step, but there are so many things that are shared that it can be very complex actually to try and disaggregate what is contributing to that increased risk. The microbiota is a good place, but we already touched on shared exercise patterns, for example, things like smoking, which actually sadly is not available as a status in the health registries. These are all things that are, for want of a better word, inherited as well. You're far more likely to be a smoker if someone in your household is a smoker. And of course, you're far more likely to develop colorectal cancer if someone in your household develops colorectal cancer. Is smoking the mechanism? Is the diet we're having the mechanism? As I alluded to earlier, is it water supplies? Is it water supplies that happen to have large amounts of endocrine disrupting chemicals that we're unaware of? Things like FPAS, etc. So what we know is that there is something that is happening and this is quite a fashionable word at the moment in cancer and in epigenetic related research, the exposome. There's something that's happening in our exposures that we're sharing that is not just down to our genes, that is at work in the mechanisms for our disease development, quite clearly. What it is, though, it's going to take a lot of work to try and find out.
Yeah. The variables are huge in what you eat, and the science about food is also part of this, probably. And just to your point about smoking, I recently read the book. Somebody calls him controversial, other calls him enlightened, but his name is Robert Plomin, and he I think he was the one that stated that this smoking inheritance was had a surprisingly high genetic factor, which they have seen in the twin studies that I've looked at, and so that could maybe be one part of adjusting for. Okay, maybe it's not that, maybe it's the food, maybe it's the sharing of fecal, I don't know, bacterial. But I want to go back to the general science around the bowel and our gut bacteria, because I guess you have heard about the book. I think it's called in German Darm mit Charme, which came out 2017, I think, 5 years ago. And that year and the following year was hugely talked about everywhere, and it's kind of gotten silent about it. Is this an observation you also have had? Is it true that the science is out still, or are we doing any progress in this field?
Very, very good question. So there is a lot of progress underway. There's a lot of very, very good work that is underway in the area of exploring the microbiota and the microbiome, the gut microbiome specifically, and its relationship with gut health. The problem is it's very complex. As you said earlier on, there are more cells in our gut microbiome, or indeed in our natural fauna and flora. I mean, in other places that we're hosting microbes in our body, not just our gut. Then there are human cells in our body. The nature of those agents are very diverse. They are bacteria, they are viruses. There's even a role of the funguses at play in our guts. For how we digest our food, how we absorb our food. We're completely dependent on these microbes for a whole host of very basic functions that we require to live. And they all have a relationship with each other. And that's also very important to keep in mind as well. And of course, all of these things have a relationship that is fundamental to our diet. And how our physiology responds to them. So are we exercising? Are we increasing our aerobic intake of different bacteria? What kind of foods are we nourishing these microbes with? These are all very complex questions, and it causes the microbiome picture to be a little bit cloudy. So as much as there is excellent work underway in this field, it's such a complex area of work to be able to disentangle all of the different environmental factors and the synergistic activities of a lot of these microbiomes, a lot of these microbes, with each other as well, from the disease course. and the disease course in something like cancer is in itself can be very complicated. What agents and chemicals are protective, and are they being taken away? Or are we actually creating an insult that is we're unable to defend against, that is increasing our risk of cancer? And there's lots of studies that are showing different things in terms of which agents in our microbiome might be protective. And are there subclasses that we're unaware of? Do they need to be releasing specific proteins or enzymes? So in answer to your question, simply, the field is extensive and there's lots of work underway, and there's been really successful work done for fecal microbiota transplants, FMT, that have shown really positive results. But that in itself can be a very difficult thing to try and roll out at a population level. So the work to better understand it, the relationship between the gut microbes and our gut health is we're still a really long way off of being able to definitively say that this transplantation will have really good results in this patient group without question of what their baseline is.
Exactly.
What their normal function is.
Yeah, and you touched upon it, like the immune system is not that just to make it stronger, then you're more healthy. It's a balance, right? And the balance between fungi and bacterial. Even if I shower too much, I earlier got these rashes on my abdomen, which was a kind of a fungus infection because the bacteria wasn't there. So we have to be careful about removing the bacteria, and vice versa, I guess. And in this field, you have all of those variables. Like for example, in space science and astronomy, it's pretty clear when the next solar eclipse is going to happen, because it's like sigma 4 security or something like that, CERN as well. So this is a field that we really need to focus on. There's a debate in Norway right now that the science funding is being lowered in the STEM fields and just in base science, which is catastrophic, because this is a part where if you're serious about public health, this obviously should be something we should talk about. And to make it even more complicated for you to answer my questions, there has been some talk about mental issues and the gut bacteria as well. So how does this potentially work? The mind over body over mind. Is it a chicken and egg situation? What do you know about mental health and the bowel bacterial stuff?
Yeah, absolutely excellent question. And we have known for quite some time, actually, that there is a very strong relationship between the brain and the gut. It's something that we sort of rather diffusely describe as the gut-brain axis. The changes in our mental state do directly impact on changes on gut function. In fact, we know in medicine, for example, it's quite commonplace to treat people who suffer from IBS, which is inflammatory bowel syndrome. So it's not the IBD, the disease that's an immune reaction to your own microbiota, which is different. But IBS is treated with tricyclic antidepressants, something like amitriptyline. We've been doing that for quite a while.
Is that an SSRI?
No, it's a TCA. It's a tricyclic antidepressant. So it works in a slightly different function, but it doesn't act directly on the serotonin inhibitors, like serotonin receptors to inhibit like SSRI. But very similar, and it's usually used in the context of depression. So how are we giving a treatment for a mental health disorder, for depression, to patients with a gut disease, and we're having very, very good control over their IBS as a result? These questions and these mechanisms are still not fully understood. We have someone working on our group at the moment on the relationship between inflammatory bowel disease. So this is the disease I was telling you about, like ulcerative colitis and Crohn's disease are the two major types. and their relationship to anxiety and depression. And you can see that these patients are far more likely to develop anxiety and depression. But also, if you have anxiety and depression, we found lots of evidence, and we've hopefully going to be publishing these findings soon from meta-analyses. So in a meta-analysis we've done from previous cohort studies, showing that if you have anxiety and depression, you're actually more likely to develop this disease.
That's
which is fascinating.
Yeah, it's really fascinating, and yeah, I've heard, I don't know if this is true, but I heard somewhere that the number of neurons in our gut is comparable to a dog, and if you add up the bacterial, maybe it's the bacterial that's deciding things together with the gut brain, telling us what to eat, what to behave, how much workout we're supposed to do. Another thing is that this is, I want to say, find it irritating, but I think I find it not beneficial for the understanding what we talked about in the start, understanding what nature tells us, if things are getting controversial without any reason. So one thing is this Crohn's disease. If they get not SSRI but the other type of antidepressants, will that be interpreted by the media or somebody as they're not taking seriously, or something is something in your brain you have to fix? Same with the fatigue syndrome, for example. We should focus on getting people's lives better. That's the main issue, and figure out what's the cause, and yeah. So just by another question I had about the gut is that this is just my layman's analysis, because I've always wondered about this. You women, you live longer than us men on average. Obviously, different reasons for that. Maybe we're just riding our motorcycles in early age. But could it be? Do you see any difference in the bowel bacteria, in the fecal or whatever in the gut for women and men? Is there differences? Are you eating more healthy? Are you having a different kind of stomach than us?
That's a very interesting question, and it's a very good one. So. So women do live longer than men, but I would just add that women live longer with more chronic diseases, actually. So there is something still at play, and particularly a lot of immune-mediated diseases, not necessarily IBD, but things like MS and rheumatoid arthritis. They're all things that women are prone to and develop at a far higher rate than men. So chronic disease is an issue when we're thinking about women's health compared to men. In terms of the microbiota, there are fundamental sex-related differences, shall we say, and it's unclear if they're due to diet alone or whether they're due to the activity of hormones. As you just alluded to a while ago, that it's actually the largest number of outlets, so connections between the brain, the central nervous system, come out at the gut at some point in the gut. So it's a really comprehensive relationship that's there. And of course, the activity of the microbes is one thing that could be mediating it, but there's a lot of other things that our body produces as well that are mediating it, including hormones as well. So the action of sex hormones on the microbiome is something else that is very fundamental and very important to keep in mind. So is estrogen increasing some types of flora in the microbiome compared to testosterone? Is it increasing levels of estrogen, or is it the presence of testosterone? So that's a very, very complex and interesting picture that we have to explore. In terms of disease, men and women tend to get inflammatory bowel disease at relatively similar rates, actually, that we've observed. So it's not a contributor in the mechanism for developing IBD, but you definitely see differences in the microbiota that are sex-based, which interestingly disappear at older ages as well.
Okay, yeah. So if we manage to get old, it's kind of spreads out.
Yeah, which gives us an indication that it is probably more hormonal related, because it's in old age as well that as we age as well, that the activity, things like estrogen levels obviously drop in post-menopause, and men's testosterone levels also drop with time as well. So it's probably hormonal related, that difference.
So my last question related to this, before we kind of round it off in a beautiful way here, is the topic that everybody is thinking about, and that's happiness. Is there food or things we can do to be more happy? Is there any indication that happiness is related to the gut in some way?
Excellent question. My goodness, Ella, I wasn't expecting so many excellent questions, I have to say. Yes. I mean, in short, I would say yes. Of course, our diet is related to how we feel about ourselves and how happy we are. I think there really is no doubt about that. The work that we tend to do, specifically here in this research group, but in science generally, is we look at disease. We focus on disease states. So I think even with that, there's pretty good evidence to show that changing dietary behaviors, and specifically dietary behaviors that result in a change in the makeup of the microbiota, which can happen within, by the way, days of sort of switching, moving away from processed foods that encourage anaerobic activities of things like lactobacillus, although they have been shown to be also beneficial in some cases. But if you can shift your diet to be able to increase the beneficial gut bacteria, there is a knock-on effect, because there are changes in the neurological connection between your gut and your brain as a result, which is based on the biochemistry at play in the gut activity of certain agents. So you can alleviate symptoms of anxiety, and you can alleviate symptoms of depression. Again, I wouldn't say this is something that is an argument for people to throw out their SSRIs necessarily tomorrow, but it's clear that diet has a very important role to play in our mental health and our mental well-being as well.
Yeah, and it sounds like it's very easy, like the obesity. Just eat less because it's just math. But to your point, it's most likely, obviously, more complicated than that. Because if you don't want to eat a specific type of food, it could be that it's not your quote unquote free will, because it's not in your frontal lobe. It's not even in your brain. It's lower down. So we should figure out a way how to make choices, and that maybe starts with the gut. I don't know. Maybe education is playing a role also. What you eat will in turn lead into a different education. Who knows, or the other way around. Yeah. So okay. So what if you have a kind of a blank check? What would or if you have a check at all, what would be your dream next research based on this that you want to see carried out?
Based on this work, so my interests really lie in this exposome. So what else is happening that we might be missing the picture on? Like, certainly the activities directly seen between the gut microbiome and our own host cells is a very important place to look. But where else in our body are we being exposed to things that might be mediating the natural interaction between our cells and the microbiome that we host, the microbiota that we're hosting in our bodies? Things like previous viral infections or current viral infections or bacterial infections that are changing our immune response, and subsequently also might be changing our own immune system's host response to the microbiomes we host. That makes sense. So my area of interest, and if I had the funding tomorrow, would be really to try and explore the antibody profile. So what have we previously been exposed to systemically as a human being that might be impacting on our host response to our microbiota at a systemic immune system level, not just at that pathway between the gut gateway, the gut window, and our microbiome.
Great answer. It doesn't seem like it's only meta-analysis that's needed. We need to build up several different fields and then do meta on the different fields, and then somewhere around the year 2200 maybe figure out the answer. It's great work that you're doing. Lastly, do you have any literature you would like to recommend to our listeners, or most importantly me?
Yeah, I mean, certainly. I think there is one particularly good book on this topic of immune-mediated diseases and inflammation, including things like cancer and cardiovascular diseases, called Inflamed, and it has a very holistic take. So it's co-written by two Americans, one who is a physician, the other who is an anthropologist. And they both work together to try and, in a slightly more abstract way, taking a step back and using the human immune system as a metaphor, really, for our world and the things that we're exposed to more widely, to try and understand how the way we live is causing us to be ill and causing us to be inflamed in our bodies and in our minds. So that's a really, really excellent book, and it also, slightly more to the side, tackles issues of activism and social justice as very important ingredients actually in generating biologically improved outcomes in populations.
Mm-hmm. Great, thank you. I think that's it. Rahma, and thank you on behalf of humanity. Thank you for all your work in this field. It's important that you continue it, and thank you very much for participating in this podcast.
Thank you for having me. It was an absolute pleasure.
Thank you very much.